Okay, so just to start off with, just to say we've got some time for the slides. We're going to go through the slides, but there will be time for questions. So if you want to post your questions as we go through the chat, we'll answer those at the end. So ready to start?
I think so, yeah, it's in 2 minutes.
Yeah, sure. So welcome to our webinar, Fresh Egg, Choosing the Right CMS. Let's just introduce ourselves. So I'm Rich Green, I'm Head of Technical Development here at Fresh Egg, which means I manage the team that look after the content management systems, the databases, the APIs, all the data side of things. I've been in the CMS world for about 20 years, so have a lot of experience.
Yeah, I'm Matt Smith. I'm Front-End Development Director at Fresh Egg. So I predominantly look after everything that your sort of user sees in the browser. So when it comes to websites, I work closely with the likes of Rich with back-end developers, and I also work closely with our design teams to take their designs and implement them into really usable and functional CMSs and websites. So hopefully today you're going to get sort of a slightly different perspective, that Angular CMS choice from developers, which hopefully should be interesting for you.
Cool. Just a little bit about Fresh Egg and who we are. So we've been going about 25 years and we are an optimization agency. So what does that mean? We build and optimize websites to meet user and business goals. So what to expect in this webinar? So we're going to talk about what is a CMS, quite an obvious one to start with, choosing the right fit. So we're not going to just focus on features, but what is the right fit for your business, how you implement the CMS and how important that is, understanding the CMS landscape, which Matt's going to talk about, the different types and the key differences, where to host your CMS, the very practical side of things, performance, security, scalability, and why they matter. Sustainability obviously has been a hot topic for a while, and then there'll be time for Q&As. To start off, what is a CMS? So a CMS is a content management system. It's a software platform that allows users to create and modify digital content without needing advanced technical skills. So what does that actually mean? For most people, if you can use a web browser, if you can use Word, you should be able to, with the right setup, create your marketing landing pages, edit your content, edit your images, and upload without any issues. And so that is what it is. Mostly we're going to be talking about CMSs that drive in websites because that's mostly what we see. But CMSs can drive other tools as well, like apps and things like that. So really, really what we're trying not to do here is just list a bunch of features. But there are some absolute basic features your CMS should do. And we see a lot of people struggling with the basics. Actually, we have companies that come to us that have got a CMS and actually they're struggling to add content or they're frustrated. If you're frustrated with your CMS, maybe just pop a hand in the chat or a wave or a thumbs up, because we certainly feel that there's a lot of people that are frustrated. But on the basics, there's a lot of CMSs out there today. So when we were doing that feature to feature comparison, maybe being really relevant sort of 10 years ago, maybe even up to 6 years ago, but the breadth of CMSs available now, they should all be hitting these basic requirements. They should all be flexible. You should be able to manage your content easily. They should definitely have some good SEO and marketing tools. So as we're going through this, if there's a feature that you need, if you need your site to be multilingual, if your site needs to support right to left text, if your CMS needs to integrate with a certain CRM, you wouldn't choose one that doesn't hit those markers. So obviously that's very important, but we're going to shy away a little bit in this talk away from just going feature to feature. So CMS is there to edit content, but really we see as CMS is empowering your business. So you should be able to launch those marketing landing pages. You should be able to do that in a fast way to get to market without going through your IT team. But there's more things you can do which are more positive in terms of, you can add and edit your forms so you can capture data, integrate, communicate with your users. Those forms can post to your CRMs, for example, subscribe to your newsletter so you can engage with your customers like that. Also, one of the things we do here a lot at Fresh Egg is to talk about personalized experiences. So that might mean that in your CMS, you deliver different content based on the time of day, or whether it's the weekend, or when your users are more engaged with certain types of products or services that or content that you're trying to put in front of people. So choosing the right CMS is about the right CMS for you, essentially. We're going to talk a little bit about that now. So as I've already said, it can feel a bit overwhelming. There's a lot of CMSs available, and many businesses will go straight to the feature tick list. But really, we want to talk about a CMS that's going to meet your business needs, for your team, and your long-term strategy. So really, at this point, I would say at the start of the project, if you're having a new CMS because your old CMS isn't working for you, but you're really clear on your business goals, then that's kind of a different choice. But if you're starting a new website, or you're frustrated with your existing website and your CMS, it might be worth at this point really just making sure that your business goals are established. So they could be for charity, you want to increase your donations. For other types of businesses, it might be that you want people to read certain types of content. And what we would do here at Fresh Egg is we would help you define those goals, but then also analyze, and are you hitting those goals? And we would do that through analytics. So just going to talk a little bit about, obviously not everyone on this call will have the budget or the time to go through this whole process, but this could look as large or small as large as you like, really. We would go into a whole discovery period. We would talk to your users, we would have empathy mapping. And this is really about defining, what does your website or your app or whatever your CMS is driving, what does it really, really need to do for you? So this is a really important step before you go into that decision about, getting caught up in all the technicalities of different CMSs. So also, what does your team bring to the table? So, and this is going to influence your decision. So if you have in-house developers, for example, that have certain skill sets, you're going to probably tend to choose a CMS that aligns with their skills. Otherwise, they've got to retrain, etc., etc. So if you're going to use an agency like ourselves or a different agency, then maybe they're coming to the table with a CMS. So then this talk is going to be more about using this as a framework so you can have a discussion with them. So when they put 2 or 3 CMSs in front of you, you can ask questions around those CMSs. You might not have a technical team. So you might be a one-person shop or just starting out in the business. So how can you get a website up and running with your CMS? And Matt will talk a little bit about that. A hybrid approach. So you might start off with an in-house team. You might engage with an agency. So that will be reaching out to potentially like a freelancer, something like that. And you might have things like compliance requirements. Your CMS might need to be hosted in a certain country, or only allowed to support certain types of data. So what you're bringing to the table is definitely going to influence your decision. So then we're going to talk a little bit about implementation. So this for me is super important. So with the breadth of CMS choices out there, it's super important that it's implemented in the right way. Most of the frustrations we see here at Fresh Egg are clients coming to us with a CMS that we know is a good CMS, but it's just been implemented badly, and it's frustrating for the users. And it also might be implemented badly because there wasn't really that alignment at the start, which we've spoken about, in terms of, the developer or the agency that's implemented it hasn't really got to grips with what the business is trying to do. So the CMS isn't kind of working for them. So the way that we would do that is we would really try to make the CMS, we really handcraft the CMS to work for you. So we break everything down into a design system, and what that allows us to do, and what that allows you to do as content editors, is edit content, but in a way that you're not going to break the design. So your design is going to be there, and your branding is going to be there. And we will build these different types of layouts and elements, and you'll be able to edit these and move these around. So you've got that. You'll be able to be a creative. If you're a marketer, for example, you really enjoy this kind of systems because you can have flexibility to create the pages you want and your different marketing opportunities, but you're not going to ever go outside of your branding and outside of those guidelines. Long gone are the days where a CMS is a design tool. You're not designing your website here, but you are using predefined components to build up these pages. But also, alongside components, we might have more template-based approach, which Matt's going to talk about now.
Yes, I think we always try and drive for this component-driven design systems where your CMS user can sort of add whole components. And I'll give you some examples of components just so if you're not clear what we mean by that. So imagine an accordion FAQ is one component. You might have a promo banner. Maybe you've got a title block or some navigation cards. So we make the system so you can add those on the page, you can change the order of them. There can be, on the flip side, you'll get these kind of quite complex builders. You might have seen these on the likes of WordPress, where you've got kind of Elementor is one example, where you can go to town and build out exactly your web page with really finite detail. The problem with this is the second that you want to make sort of wholesale changes across your design, you've then got to potentially go into lots and lots of pages, make the same changes. So it's inconsistent from a sort of developer perspective and an editor's perspective. So it's all about finding a balance. So we'll look for templates, which is kind of reusable patterns. So we'll look and say, well, that should be maybe a news article. The top of that page is consistent. So they would bake that into into our code, connected to the CMS. But if we need to change the way the top of that page looks, we do it once and it changes on multiple pages. So it's all about driving efficiency.
Absolutely. So just a little brief look at component-based approach, just in case that's not sort of clear. So we break these components down. So as Matt suggested already, there's a frequently asked questions, there's a forms picker, there's an image grid, downloads. So any type of requirement your business has. So some of these could be very business specific, and some of these can be an integration. Some of the things we do here for one of our clients is one of the components will allow them to bring in their Trustpilot reviews, but it will be configurable. So they can either select individual reviews, or they can choose reviews over 4 stars or reviews that they've had in the last month, things like that. So some of these are very general, some of these are very specific to your business. But what this really, the benefits of this as well is not only that flexibility, but it means that if you have a new requirement, it's quite clear someone, either your developers or the agency you're working with or the freelancer just needs to build one component. They add that into the mix, and then that component can then be mixed with your previous components. So this is really where we see CMS. Certainly, this probably has been around for about 6-7 years. So this is kind of where we CMS is at, and this is how we build them. We think this gives the best results.
Cool. So I'm going to, before we go into some of the sort of key decision factors for when choosing the CMS, I first want to just talk a bit about understanding the CMS landscape, because there's a lot of sort of terminology that you might hear around. So headless, open source, proprietary, etc. I just want to go through a few slides, explain what some of these terms are. Some of them are a bit technical, so depending on your sort of comfort level, I'll do my best to try and simplify it and explain what they mean. So I think it's important to understand these so you can factor them into your conversations and your discussions when making that decision. So I'm going to start off with a So these are the various points that we're going to talk about in a moment. And so I'm going to start off with just understanding the sort of varying landscape of different CMSs available. So we can go right from what we call no code. So I'll give you some examples of no code. That could be like the likes of Wix or Squarespace, where you're paying for a subscription to use it, and it's almost like a design tool that's in the browser and you can make your website. So this is ideal if you're really small business, it's not a very complex needs, you don't have budget for developers, this could be a good option. Obvious downside is sort of flexibility, customization, optimization, etc. These can be some of the sorts of negatives with that approach. Next, you've got slightly more customization, so low code. We'll often find sort of designers preferring these solutions. So examples of a low code would be something like Webflow. That's kind of a CMS where you can go in and you can build it in the browser, your web page, but you can also inject a bit of code in if you're feeling comfortable with that to customize the experience a little. So slightly more flexible. Then we've got what we class as our sort of developer friendly, and this probably makes up the large proportion of CMSs. This is the likes of your WordPresses, your Umbracos, your Drupals. So this is developers who want full control to build out your website exactly to your requirements, handle scalability, and tweak all the things like performance and security, etc. Then you've got right on the far end, enterprise solutions. Now, these are going to be perfect for your sort of large organizations with complex requirements, but they want all really feature rich. So this is going to bring in your marketing integrations. This is going to handle sort of CRM integrations, and security and scalability are all baked in. So these clients that have the budget, because these often come with huge sort of license costs. And we're going to go into sort of that license versus open source shortly. So the next point we're going to talk about is headless versus traditional. So this is a really sort of hot topic, and something really to consider, because at Fresh Egg, this is particular interest to us because we've got a focus on both. So we can explain the differences and the pros and cons. We're in good position to do that. So think of a website as made up of two parts. You have what we call your back end. This is your content management system and all the stuff that powers that, databases, where it's hosted, etc. Then you've got your front end, which is what the actual user interacts with and sees in the browser. And let me just switch over. So a traditional CMS, you have these together. So your back end and your front end, they work together. They're powered from single technology, and it's a single platform. And often that means it's easier to use. It's easier to set up, should I say, which results in potentially lower development costs. I'm using words like potentially here because there's always nuances around these things. Because they're a single platform, you've often get more options in terms of plugins and pre-built themes. So what I mean by that is you can have a plugin that adds a feature to the website. And because it's all in a single platform and a single technology, a plugin can affect both your content management system and the front end experience. So to give you an example of that, say if you wanted a membership area, you could install a plugin. Take WordPress example, they have something called MemberPress. You can install that. It's going to create your login experience on the front end. It's going to handle all the sort of authentication, resetting passwords. But in the back end, it's also going to enhance your CMS to add the management for your users, the management of how the content is on those login pages, etc. So that's a real big benefit. General downsides of traditional, they can be slower because how they work is every time a user wants to see your web page, it has to go up to your server because it's all connected. It has to generate, and there's a bit of energy usage there and time it takes, build that web page and then send it back to the user. And because of that sort of connection, there's a dependency on the CMS and all the backend running in order for your front end experience to work. So if your backend CMS was to fall down, there was some critical error with it, that's actually going to affect your customer's experience. So your website's going to go down, and that's not going to be a good look. Typically, we see it may be harder to innovate. So when we talk about headless, you'll see there's a little bit more flexibility in the tools and technology you can use because they're kind of separate systems. And then security risks. Let's remind myself what security risks. Yeah, so security risks, because traditional website setups are tightly coupled to your server, the server is actually a place where your data is stored, and that's actually a potential sort of avenue for attacks and threats. So you'll see with the headless, which I'll talk about in a minute, kind of eliminates that. So you're removing a whole vulnerability from the system. So headless. So say this is what we call a decoupled system. So they're separated, and the CMS talks to your front end website via something called an API. API is just a fancy word for basically a request to get data. So because of that, because they're split and they're using these APIs to get data, we can actually have what we call like a multi-channel delivery. So your CMS, if it has API headless capabilities, it could power not only your website, but it could maybe send some data to a mobile app, or maybe you've got some internal intranet or anything else digital that could consume APIs and get data from your CMS. that would be a good solution. It allows us to, what we build at Fresh Egg is we build statically rendered websites. So this is essentially going back to how websites were when we just sent HTML down the wire, which is the raw sort of building blocks of a web page. With a headless approach, we can build these HTML pages ahead of time and serve them directly from the likes of a CDN, which is a content delivery network, which makes it incredibly fast. So there's a real performance benefit with headless. And also because we're building ahead of time, there's no server, we're removing a huge security threat. And in addition, there's that limited downtime because we've split. If the back end was to fall down for whatever reason, CMS goes down, your front end experience is going to stay stable, just being served on your CDN, happy as anything. So that gives real sort of peace of mind and security when it comes to that sort of headless setup. Potential negatives, they can be a bit more heavy with the setup in terms of development effort. They're often maybe a little bit more specialist. You've got two systems to manage, front end and back end. They need to talk to each other. So there's a complexity there and a potentially additional maintenance. And they can be a bit more time consuming. Again, I'm saying can because, when you have a setup that's built like we have at Fresh Egg, we can sort of spin up really efficiently headless sites. So we maybe don't potentially see that so much, but these are just sort of general opinions. So open source versus license. So open source CMSs, this is where the source code, so the code that runs that CMS, is publicly available. You can view it, contribute to it. So anyone with any developer in the world can contribute to the likes of WordPress because it's an open source CMS. Often open source is cost effective for users because it's more often than not free. I say often free because there are things like paid extensions. You have kind of premium versions of sort of open source software as well. Generally, the nature of open source is they want people to contribute to it. And because it's open, it means it's flexible. So developers really love working with open source because we can enhance the admin experience. If you've got a particular specialist requirement for your business, we can go in and we can much easier customize it. I can give you an example of that. We work with a large estate agent and they have property data that comes from a third-party system. They wanted in their Umbraco CMS, which is another open source that we work closely with, they wanted the ability to be able to pick properties from their third-party API. Now, perhaps a licensed or paid for where it's a bit more locked down, you might not have that flexibility. Open source, we would be able to go in, change the editing experience, make network calls to go and fetch data, and we were able to build them a really great sort of property selection feature for them. Other benefits, you've got a really strong community of open source, so lots of contributors. That's going to help if you need to find developers to work on it, they're going to be readily available. If you need support, there's huge forums out there and everyone really wants to contribute and it's sort of really supportive environment. No vendor lock-in. What I mean by that is if you need to switch hosting providers, for example, much easier with an open source platform because you're not tied down to sort of a paid system, a subscription-based model. Potential downsides, potentially a little bit more setup work. It's a little less plug and play. That's not often the case. You've got WordPress.com, for example, where you can spin up a WordPress site, but typically it's going to be a little bit of setup. You may require sort of development help with open source. And potentially missing that kind of dedicated support. And we'll talk about this in a minute when we talk about license and proprietary. If you've got things like you need to update your CMS for security patches, etc., it's going to be down to you. Whereas the license and proprietary versions, they're going to handle a lot of that optimizations, keeping on top of everything, ensure your CMS is compliant. So we can talk about that now. So our license or proprietary, essentially, we're just saying it's a paid for model where you're going to have a subscription monthly cost. So you always need to be thinking that, baking that into any budget requirements. There's going to be initial build, but then there's going to be those monthly costs, which you're not necessarily going to get with open source. Typically, they're going to be more feature rich because they're less extendable, because of their sort of lack of openness. They're going to pile in the features to get users to sign up. So if you want something that's going to be really feature rich, and I'm thinking like this is more maybe on your enterprise scale, so for Adobe experience managers and Optimizely that we use at Fresh Egg, they are incredibly feature rich for that reason. You've got things like the performance and scalability and security all baked in and taken care of. So it's ideal for someone if you've got the budget and the features are there, then perfect solution, peace of mind, and you can sort of rest easy. Negatives, I've just spoke about, potentially expensive, less flexibility. You've got that issue with potential vendor lock-in. How easy is it to migrate out of one of those systems to something else? Can be a challenge. And because there's a cost, you're going to get, generally speaking, less developers using it because it's not free. So developers like free stuff, so we can build plugins and stuff using those tools, where we're going to be less appealing to build the types of plugins and extensions, etc., to something that's paid for. So that's those two. Rich is going to talk about hosting.
So where are you going to host your CMS? There's a few options. There's pretty much like three main types of options. So self-hosted, cloud hosting platforms, cloud hosting platforms, or software as a service. So each one has its benefits. I'll talk through them each now. Self-hosted. So I would say now self-hosted has gone away. I mean, literally when we started at Fresh Egg, there was a server in the garage and that would be running our websites. Then we'd move to someone else looking after that server, but we're basically just buying a computer that's serving websites. These things have kind of gone away now. The next two, I would say, are potentially a lot better options. We do work with a bank which had to go down this route because of their security and their compliance. So this is an option. This is very much you managing it with a very technical team, looking after the updates, the backups, all of that kind of stuff. And as we move towards the end, you'll see some of that stuff can be taken care of by vendors. This is kind of the middle ground. So you've got Azure and Amazon Web Services. There are other ones available. These are the big two. So this is like a middle ground. So you've got your own, you're responsible for all of your features and all the things that you're using there and the maintenance, and you are responsible for the backups. This can be automated, but ultimately this gives you more control than the next option. But you're not having to actually physically rent a server. And some of the absolute benefits of this is you can have pay-as-you-go pricing. So this works really well where you might have, if you've got an event coming up once a year where if you've got like ticket sales or you've got a big event that you run and your website spikes a lot, you can actually increase your performance of your site before that event, or you can actually get it to auto scale. So it can respond. It will cost more for that event. But the good thing is previously you'd have to buy that server at a certain amount and pay that throughout the whole year. With systems like this, you can increase your budget, increase your memory of your server, your processing power to deal with those events. So and what we like about this type of platform as well is you can build your workflows in. So as you're deploying your changes to your CMS or your website, they can run tests and we can automate this process. That's called continuous integration, which we do here. And that is available on this. The third option is software as a service. So this is basically getting a credit card out or having some agreement, paying for your CMS to be hosted, and all of those responsibility goes to the vendor offering this service. So for here, we've got Umbraco. We can use Umbraco Cloud for that. As Matt's already mentioned, we've got WordPress, where you can just spin up a WordPress database. No one's got to spend time configuring the database, getting it set up. No one's got to worry about patching and all of that kind of stuff. So this is kind of, you're basically just paying for a service. And this is kind of where, unless you have, as you go down this scale, unless you need that flexibility of Azure and AWS, or if unless you need that dedicated server, this is probably where we would be suggesting you go, because it's certainly come on in the last few years. These are so flexible and you can be up and running in minutes with these.
Cool, thanks, Rich. So I just wanted to talk about some of the, I think we're going to move in now to some of the sort of decision factors that you're going to be wanting to think about when you're sort of making your choice. So scalability, and what I mean by scalability is, as your business grows, be it you're going to get more traffic to your website, more content over time, more users, maybe you're expanding into multiple websites, you need multiple languages, etc. Maybe it's just increased complexity over time to match your sort of business goals. Then you're going to need it to scale without breaking performance or requiring full rebuilds. That's the last thing that anyone wants, is to build a CMS and then in a few years' time realize, it's not scaling, and then full rebuild can be hugely costly. So just go through. So a couple of things just to consider when you're looking at future-proofing your sort of CMS and choices. So performance and infrastructure. Somebody's going to be a bit technical, but if you were looking for yourself, I'd be looking for things like, does it handle caching? So this is the CMS's ability to build all web pages ahead of time and then serve them. You're going to be looking for things like CDN, so that content delivery network, really key for getting performance out of your website. You might want to be looking at terms like, does it offer load balancing? So this is where you might have multiple servers running your website, and they can split the sort of effort, if you will, to load it. Database and content storage. So how is it storing your content? Really important one. We talked about CDNs, and then there's some technical things around databases. I won't go into too much detail now, but the efficiency of how it gets that data can be key. We talked about headless, so API and headless capabilities. So it might not be something that your website does now, but it may be in 5 years' time, you might want to consider a different front end solution. At that point, maybe you might be considering, do I need to change CMSs, or can I just rebuild the front end of our website? In which case, you want to be ensuring that CMSs have API and headless capabilities. Now, I was having a little look in preparation for this call, and actually most CMSs nowadays do have API and headless capabilities. So it's not necessarily something that you're going to find difficult to see, but what you might want to be looking at is how optimized they are for those. So there's different ways of running headless sites, about fetching the data. You've got different methods for getting things. We've got something called like REST APIs, which is a classic way of getting data. You've got some new kid on the block like GraphQL, which is a slightly different way of getting data, which is actually a lot more efficient. So you might want to be looking at some of those key terms and discussing those with your sort of partner or agency, or when you're just looking at websites. As Richard mentioned earlier, things like, are you going to need more sites in the future? Does it handle multi-site? Are you going to need potential multilingual support? One of the things we do at FreshEgg quite a bit is we have a single code base, and we're going to be wanting to power multiple websites, perhaps with different looks and feels. So does it handle sort of themability? And this is where you're probably going to need to come to an agency that's going to be able to offer the right sort of CMS and setup and implementation to achieve that sort of thing. So for one of the pet insurance provider we work for, Agria, we have a single code base, and that powers Kennel Club insurance, and it also now powers Lloyd's pet insurance. That's all from a single code base and set up in such a way, and all powered from Umbraco as well for content, which is a multi-site setup for that. You want to be looking at the community. Does it have a large community? Things you can do to try and tell is, is there active forums, discussion boards, etc. If you wanted to get really techie, you could go on the likes of GitHub, which is where we store sort of code, and you can see things like, if it's open source, you can see the number of downloads that's had, you can see the number of stars developers give. So just assessing popularity, because you don't want something that's like a fad or something new. that hasn't got that sort of potential longevity, it could be a risk there that something's going to fall out of favor, or you might not be able to find the developers to work on it if it's quite specialist. Extensibility, so how easy is it to extend? We talked about integrations and plugins, and ease of migration as well, really key. So this can be quite difficult to actually understand when you're sort of looking at CMS's websites and marketing materials, because it's often quite technical and they're not necessarily going to shout about this, but we do find that certain solutions will store your data in such a way that it makes it really difficult to extract that data if you were to move CMSs. One thing I would say is CMSs that are built and focus on headless, so this could be the likes of your sort of Contentful and Strappy, they are much better at migrating data just because of the way they have to store data to make headless work.
Cool. So we're going to talk about security. I'm conscious of time, so I think we've gotten quite a few questions through, so I want to leave time for that. So we're probably going to speed through slightly quicker. Not that these are less important. Obviously, security is massively important. So why is security important? Protects your customer data, prevents costly downtime, and really it protects your brand and reputation. I mean, obviously, as a CMS vendor, you'd be looking at security, right? So everyone's going to be asking about security. So again, with the breadth of CMSs available, but how can you basically find out about this? You can see if there's certifications that they support, what their access control looks like. Do they have a dedicated security page on their website? And generally just have a dig around. So if you're down to the last sort of 3 CMSs you're considering, and you really want to go deep on this, obviously there's a lot of research you can do.
It's worth noting we can, if we're going over these quite fast, we can share these slides as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we have got a bit of time. We've got about 20 minutes left.
Cool. So performance, I think this is a bit of a no-brainer in terms of why it's important. We know that performance, essentially how fast your website loads, that's going to affect the user experience. And not only for the user, but if you've got a slow CMS as well, that's going to be inefficient for content editors. There's a direct correlation between conversions and engagement, SEO rankings. So performance is really key. And also with performance, we're seeing much higher percentage of mobile use, if global access, if you're on an international brand. Not everyone's going to have, your latest 4G, 5G on their phones. So you need to really be considering performance as a factor for sort of accessibility in that stance. And also, if you factor in performance as one of your sort of decision making, it's going to potentially reduce server costs as well, because there's less of it, it's less energy that it needs to render your website. And then there's sustainability benefits as well, which we're going to talk in a bit more detail. So with performance, if I was evaluating a CMS, you want to be looking at one of the sort of key things is how it handles media, images and videos. Is it optimizing these automatically, or is it requiring sort of third-party plugins? Maybe it's not doing it at all. Is it serving different sizes for mobile versus desktop? You want to be looking at caching, which I mentioned earlier. You really need sort of caching if you've got a traditional CMS, just to save all that server energy that's going to be used up to build your website pages every time. You want to be looking in its ability to serve assets and web pages via content delivery networks. You want to be looking at potentially automatic scaling as well. So if you've got, this comes back to more the sort of hosting side of things, you often have sort of, you'll be put on a particular sort of solution that will scale to one sort of a number of users visiting. What happens if you have traffic spikes? Is it going to scale up automatically, or is it just going to sit there and get laggy? So look out for automatic scaling as one of those sort of quite important parts of performance. I'd want to be looking as well at examples of brands using the CMS, which you'll know that's going to have a high traffic. We work with Optimizely, and I was seeing they use powering the likes of H&M. So that's going to give us a really good idea that that's going to be a CMS that can handle a lot of traffic. And just how fast is it out of the box? There's lots of optimizations and plugins and stuff that we can do, but just thinking about the core without having to add all that extra weight to get the performance is really key.
Sustainability is obviously it's been big on the agenda for a while, and definitely coming more and more into when we speak to our clients, they're obviously they're often asking questions around sustainability. So is your CMS environmentally friendly? So we need to tie the CMS in here with how the website's being delivered. So basically, it's what your carbon footprint. And in a couple of slides, I'll show you there's some frameworks now about how you can measure your the impact on your website. One thing that's obviously Matt's mentioned, and something we're big advocates here at Fresh Egg, is the headless approach. And that generally, and again, we don't want to generalize too much, but generally the headless approach will be more sustainable because the energy won't, every time your user visits your website, the energy that's using is less than if they had to go back to your database and keep pulling out the same pages. Again, there's caching to get around that, but generally the headless is seen to be more environmentally sustainable. One of the clients we work with, Matt's mentioned the pet insurer, we've managed to have a 59% reduction on their old site by our approach, and that was using an open source CMS with a headless solution. So yeah, so obviously all of this encourages responsible web practices. So if you're engaging with an agency and they're not thinking about sustainability, then potentially if that's they're part of a choice if you're choosing an agency, let's just make sure I would say this is on their agenda if it's important to you. So I'm not going to go through all these questions because these slides will be handed out. But if you're hosting now, there's literally a badge that will state whether your host is environmentally friendly and how environmentally friendly they are. I'm not going to go through all these, but yeah, they're all there. But this is one framework that we've heard a lot about, and what they're trying to do is standardize this so you can actually measure, and you can actually go and put your own website in on this greenwebfoundation.org. You can go and put your website here, put your competitors' websites here, press the check button and just have a little evaluation about how sustainable your websites are. So cost. Now, Matt's spoken about some enterprise high-end CMSs. There's no point talking about those if you haven't got the budget for them, or I would say the requirements for them. So if we spin on to the next slide. So what we do here is we'll balance up the need for the client against whether we go for that license fee, but the license fee isn't only the cost, is what the point is here. So you have to think about what the initial setup and implementation, how some technologies are faster to develop, some need more customization, but also think about ongoing maintenance and updates. Who's looking after the patching of the server? Have you got to engage with a freelancer or your IT team, which is, it's not direct, it's still a direct cost. The license fees, what do you have to pay for a third-party plugin? Are they free? What's the ongoing cost of those? Do they change with how busy your site gets? It might be really great that it's free for a certain amount of users. Once you get past a certain amount of usage, the cost can spiral. So just it's not one or the other. It's thinking about all of these things. Bandwidth, again, and scalability comes into play here. So wrapping it up. So we've got about 15 minutes left. So I'm just going to wrap up a slide, and then we've got a few questions we're going to go through. So what does the right CMS look like? So it's everything we've spoken about. And again, it's about getting that balance between the perfect fit. So it aligns with you because it allows you to do what you want to do, but it also meets your business needs and goals. Is it user-friendly? Can you work with it? If you're working with your CMS every day, you don't want to be opening your CMS with that sigh of kind of, oh, I've got to create a web page here. It should be user-friendly, scalable, as Matt's mentioned. It should grow with your business. That also comes on to future-proofing. Again, that headless approach, being able to swap out either the back end or the front end technology. We find generally websites, the lifespan of a website is generally sort of 3 to 5 years with how fast technology is moving, but obviously also your business and business needs might change over that period as well. It's got to be cost effective. There's no point talking about an expensive enterprise CMS if you don't have the requirements for it or you don't have the budget. Secure and high performing, we've spoken about. Easy maintenance, or if it's not easy, someone else is maintaining it under your cost. And satisfied users. So obviously the users to your website is always paramount. So it's great, your CMS is flexible, but what does it mean for your users? If it means a faster experience, a more enjoyable experience, they're going to engage with you more often. Meeting business goals. So how do you know your CMS has met business goals? So what we'll look at a lot of here at Fresh Egg is analytics. So if you've got a certain business goal, are you getting more donations with your news site? Are you getting more views on a certain page when you need that information to be viewed? And that's really about what we would say is tying it back to what we said at the start is if you've got those business goals, if you have to go to someone within your business to try to get a budget to build a new website, it's important to go with those goals, but also to be able to go after the website's live and after it's been live for a while to go back and say, yeah, we met these business goals. So we talk a lot here about Fresh Egg about measuring that success. So we've got some questions that come through. So, yep, we've got, oh, thank you for the feedback. Yeah, we're going to share the slides after. So what role does AI and automation play in modern CMS platforms? And is it worth prioritizing? Absolutely. So AI is high on the agenda. We didn't include it in these slides because, you know, it gets spoken about a lot. And what we really concentrate here at Fresh Egg is useful AI. Like, how is it useful for your business and how is it useful for your CMS in this? So certainly, like, the basics, like alt tagging all your images with AI, absolutely essential. AI is being used in SEO with a certain strategy. AI can allow you to create content. If you're having to create a lot of content, it can draft up that content. It can source images from your digital asset manager. There's a lot we can do with AI. What we didn't want to do in this talk is just, you know, we'll see it all the CMS vendors, all the software providers got AI badges everywhere. So it's really about, if they mention AI, what does it actually do? Is it useful for your business? And that. So you got anything to add on that, Matt? Or
yeah, there's sort of two sort of scales. There's really sort of practical AI that does quite micro tasks, like you mentioned alt text. I've seen some really good examples of AI creating you know, meta descriptions, you know, based off the content that you've got in your CMS. But then there's also that other sort of flip side of which you're going to see with your sort of low code and no code solutions, is using AI to sort of put together whole pages. You know, I would always sort of take that with a big sort of pinch of salt. It's only going to be, you know, AI is very good, but it doesn't quite have that sort of human touch in terms of, you know, the user needs yet. It's not quite there. So I find often that it sort of makes something only sort of half good at the moment. And also those types of tools, they're not going to be as efficient for sort of scalability. You know, that's not going to necessarily be thinking about componentization and, you know, updating wholesale changes. So I would tend to steer clear unless it's a very, very small site with very low requirements, simplicity. Yeah. There's another question here. So I think this is half connected to that. So what do you think of relying on plugins? Should we rely on them for key conversion journeys?
So I mean, it depends where you're at in the scale. If you don't have a way of doing what you need to achieve for your business without a plugin, use the plugin. What we'll spend a lot of time on here, we do a lot of CRO, which is conversion rate optimization. I know I spoke about A/B testing. So some of those plugins won't allow you to do that. So what we're always doing is trying to measure the success. So if a plugin doesn't allow you to do that, then again, no budget. If you don't have the budget, use the plugin. If you're talking about a key conversion journey, if you're talking about a donation journey, we will spend a lot of time refining that journey and measuring how successful that journey is.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I'm imagining sort of that key conversion. I think donation is a really good example. You know, sometimes it's a lot down to budget. I think if you've got the budget, designer and developer building a bespoke solution is probably 9 out of 10 times going to be better. You can get all the sorts of optimization and personalization that you're going to need. However, not everyone has the budget to spend on that. That's often sort of costly and timely. So I think plugins are a good fit if budget is needed. But also I would say with plugins is, you know, you'll get services that are tailored to a specific requirement. So, you know, a donation platform that really has spent a lot of time and research and has lots of data around, you know, knows everything about a donation journey, for example, or we talked about those sort of membership journeys, etc. Then yeah, they could actually be a really good fit because they have that sort of focus. So definitely not, I wouldn't say avoid them. I just think just be cautious and sort of responsible. I think plugins as well can have sort of negative connotations because they can often be maybe built poorly, or the way they're integrated causes sort of performance and scaling issues. There's a bit of a reliance on different platforms. It can become a maintenance headache. So I think, yeah, just tread carefully when it comes to plugins.
Yeah, I was going to think about the SEO plugins. So it's a good example. SEO plugins, certainly very popular. They can promise a lot, but it's again budget and time. So here we handcraft our SEO strategies, and we will be measuring against those all the time. If you're using a plugin, a very general plugin, that will just be making assumptions about your business, assumptions about your content, and it will work, but it's not going to work to that nth degree. So we've got a question here around use permissions and roles. So it was something we're supposed to cover, so apologies for missing that. It kind of come in those key features. So it's basically workflows. So workflows is you have someone in your organization that can create content, but ultimately you've got a key stakeholder that needs to approve that content. I mean, that's just one of the things you'd need to see. Most CMSs are going to have some good workflow stuff in there. So what I would do again is map out what you need and then check that CMS fulfills that need. We've got one here about so what CMSs do you use? So we mentioned them. So generally, sometimes we'll work with WordPress. Usually, we'll work with WordPress when a client has already got WordPress, and they'll come in and we'll be managing that WordPress, and we'll be potentially doing their SEO and CRO with that platform.
Yeah, what we find with our clients that come to us with WordPress websites, beyond just maintaining them, what's happened, I think, a couple of times is we've ended up rebuilding the front end of it, but leaving them WordPress because they really love the way it's all set up, but we're building a headless version of it. So that's our sort of way of working with WordPress.
Yeah. And then we use Umbraco. So we're Umbraco Platinum partners. The reason we gone with Umbraco, I've been using Umbraco for many years, is that it's super flexible. It's kind of that middle ground between the stuff we've been talking about. So it's very scalable, it's super flexible, it's open source, and it's free. So that really hits all the goals. And one of the things that we love about Umbraco is that we have our clients come up with all sorts of requirements, like for integrations or for what they need. And with Umbraco, because it's open source and because it's so flexible, we never have to say no. We never say, oh, we can't integrate your CRM with Umbraco. We can't integrate your Trustpilot reviews or what it might be. So that's why we stick with that. And we're also Optimizely partners. And Optimizely is on a different scale, really, in terms of the level of support that Optimizely offer, the level of I'd say with Optimizely, the product suite they offer around their CMS. So if you were going to choose just the CMS, obviously this is a CMS talk, and you had Umbraco versus Optimizely, for example. If you're just talking CMS, they're very like for like, but the product suite around Optimizely is huge. So they'll do a lot about experiences, personalization, measuring your success, obviously. They're more of a kind of DXP, so you'll be able to publish to multi-channels at the same time. So sometimes they definitely more towards larger organizations. So for us, those three solutions will pretty much offer a balance for everybody. So it'll just depend on the client's need. So we've got 5 more minutes, so just a couple more questions. So which one should we take? I think we spoke about multilingual. What are the biggest pitfalls that when selecting a CMS and how to avoid them? So we'll take that one, or just feel like
the biggest pitfalls?
I'd say this is again like something that I would say absolutely go back to the implementation, actually thinking through. So I don't think there's a lot of bad CMSs. If there's a bad CMS, you're going to see a lot of bad reviews. You're not going to have much engagement with it. If you're seeing a CMS that's popular, it's likely to be a great choice, but it is that implementation. So as we said, so a couple of the projects we will have here, certainly from the Umbraco side, Umbraco is super flexible. If it's set up in the wrong way, it's not going to work for people. So it's that implementation. Yeah. I'd say rather than the CMS choice, it's the implementation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, speaking from experience, having dealt with a few of these page builder type websites, I would be steering clear from those. So that would be my general advice. If you get sort of lured into these jazzy websites. Just to give you an example, I think like Elementor for WordPress, where it's very, very flexible. They are a headache to migrate from. They are a headache to make wholesale changes. Generally, at least from our experience, in our opinion, not so developer friendly. So I think if you're looking for sort of a serious CMS solution, I would steer clear of those advertisers, kind of like page builders.
Let me just flick on. We've got a couple more minutes, 3 more minutes. We'll just flick on to the last slide because it's got mine and Matt's contact details here. So yeah, if you have any questions over and above there, we've answered. There are a few more questions in the chat, but if you want to reach out to us, there's our email addresses here. The slides will be shared. We've just got 3 more minutes. I'm just going to see if we can answer one more question. Answers. Oh yeah. So what metrics can we use? I think we've spoken about this already. Analytics, basically, in terms of success.
Yeah, actually, that's. I think just whilst we talk about question about metrics, so using analytics, I'll just relay back to this question we've had around relying on plugins. That can be a downside. Try to get custom analytics events. So we're often work with GA4, and as developers, we'll be putting events to analyze and track user behavior on everything we're building. So everything from does the CMS, the accordion open and close, how often people use that, which ones. If you're going to just pop a plugin, you're going to be relying on whatever tracking that they've got, and I suspect 9 out of 10 times it's not going to be as thorough as something maybe a bit more custom and bespoke. So if that conversion journey that you're talking about is really key for you, do consider just how well it's tracked, because that's going to really impact, is it working for you? What stage are they falling out? Does it have, if it's a form that you're just bolting on, can you get form analytics? Can you see how many people are erroring in which specific field? You're not always going to get that.
Yeah, that makes me think actually about this constant iterative approach in terms of the web build. So sometimes customers will feel like, oh, we've built our CMS, we've built our website, we're done. That is, yeah, you can, especially around budgets if you've only got a certain budget. But we would say by looking at those analytics and metrics and then tweaking them and seeing, did that change that we did it help or not? Did it allow users to engage? So when all that stuff that we do, the extra work setting up, we have those key insights to all of those things. So is that button being clicked? Why not? What happens if we move it up the page? How well does that perform for us? So it's and if you've got a CMS that allows you to do that, or you're engaging with an agency that allows you to do that, then you're always increasing your chances of meeting your business goals. Cool. So I think we've run out of time. Yeah. So cool. Please feel free to reach out to us. Any questions? We always love talking about this kind of stuff. We're super enthusiastic about it. So yeah, look forward to hearing from you. And yeah, I hope you've enjoyed that.
Yeah. Thanks for your time, everyone. Cheers.